The other big story of the day is that Robert Jenrick, we've talked about the grooming gangs, Robert Jenrick, the shadow justice section, the man who lost out to Kemi Badenoch in the leadership of the Tory party, stood up and used some very choice words today and said that the Tories, when or if re-elected, could seek to limit immigration to the UK from what he described as alien cultures. The Shadow Justice Secretary said this morning that we have seen millions of people enter this country in recent years, and some of them have backward, frankly, medieval attitudes to women. And he stood by his claim that the grooming gang scandal started with the onset of mass immigration. We're delighted to welcome former MEP and migration expert Steven Woolfe. A very happy New Year to you, Steve.
A very happy New Year. If only we could say it was, really, but for families, yes, but for some families, certainly not. And this is the case, what we're covering now.
Jenrick will be slaughtered by the bedwetters for the language that he used. I wanted to... I'm sure you weren't, because you were probably out buying that very impressive jumper yesterday, but Peter Bleksley was on the show. And what he said, I thought resonated, and he chose his words very well, and I probably won't do him justice. But he basically said that Britain is based on many good things. Charitable works, people with humanity and morality, and we've always looked out for people who are worse off and tried to do our bit across the world. Now, that should never change. But alongside that, there are now factually people coming to this country who are taking advantage of stretched resources, who are coming here because apparently they don't like the culture, the background from whence they came, and then they spend most of the time trying to trash what has been here for many hundreds of years and implement things that aren't popular. And I think the basis of what Peter said yesterday, which resonated with many people, was we're very happy to have people that can give something to our country. Don't take the PISS out of us. Work with us, be part of us, and that's the way of a civilised society. But that isn't happening. It's not harmonious, is it? It's a problem for millions of people.
Yes, and unfortunately, Robert Jenrick is correct, and those statements are accurate. And much of what happened and the changes that we see today, the cultural issues where people wish to pull down statues, where we have large gangs, as we know from Albania, according to the police, who now control marijuana, cocaine, sex trafficking, and of course the high-end car stealing, where we see people, and what we've talked about over the past few weeks, the recognised grooming gangs that looked at young girls in a disgraceful way because they were white. All of them and all of those attitudes have occurred since the mass migration that were introduced, first by Tony Blair, accelerated by Gordon Brown, and then exacerbated under the Cameron and Boris Johnson leaderships. That is where the problem has come. And if we look back very carefully to the immigration that we saw after the Second World War, the Windrush, those who came from Uganda, the Irish communities that have been settled here for over a couple of hundred years, all of them settled peacefully into the way that Britain was and the cultures that we had. Yes, of course, we saw discrimination towards them. And yes, of course, there were those within their own communities that weren't happy with where they lived and used choice words and languages, but they were in the minority. Today, we see something totally different. It's an us against them, and the language that we're hearing, the divisive language, white privilege. If you're white, you shouldn't get a job instead of someone who should be getting it because of their diversity, equality, and inclusion rights. This is not the nature of Britain as we knew it. This is not the nature of Britain as we accepted it after the Second World War with our open hands. This is the nature of politics today and culture today that is trashing our history and our past, when they're supposedly saying they've left awful places and want to stay in a nice place.
I think that's right, and I don't know if you heard, as usual, we haven't got that much time, but it's the story of the jazz teacher in the London College, this guy who for 50 years has lectured and played, and there was a questionnaire went round. I just did the story, Trinity in London, and he dared to send an email to the principal saying there isn't racism, there is equality, everybody gets involved, and it was leaked, and students refused to be taught by him, and the staff spurned him, and he's been trashed, and he's having to take legal advice from the Free Speech Union. I've always believed that we need to be open and honest about the things that are wrong. The problem is, when Robert Jenrick talks about alien cultures with medieval attitudes, the left wing jump up and down and say, you're all racist, this is outrageous. There isn't a racist bone in my body. Genuinely, hand on heart. What I will absolutely categorically say is, I want all people to give something back to their society. I'm embarrassed at nearly 60 to live in a land right now under a government that thinks it's all right to freeze pensioners to death and now take away their prescriptions when they're over 60, when they've worked all their damn lives. I'm embarrassed to be in a country whereby we seemingly favour other people who have done nothing, whether they've come from another country or not, over people who have worked all their lives. And I think the cost of living crisis and how difficult it is for people has exacerbated this look at migration. And there will be some people who say it's not just migrants. No, it isn't just, but it's part of the issue. We are stretched and we are putting our own citizens at the back of the queue. And that, Stephen's not a good look, not for anybody.
No, it's not a good look. And what's happening now is across the globe, they're beginning to see it. And yes, people are saying, OK, this is a battle between Elon Musk, one of the wealthiest men in the world, and one of the most powerful in Keir Starmer. But the very idea that we've not had a proper investigation, and I've read both the reports by Lady J, and I don't agree that they actually do cover the main issue, which is why so many people ignored, for example, those young girls when they made those claims. But that is just another example to add to those that you've just mentioned about the way that we treat our pensioners, the way that we've treated our armed services, the way that we've treated people who've saved and contributed to this country, and the way that we ignore the mass economic and financial costs of large-scale migration. I've been on the show many times. I mean, I looked at last year alone, £1 billion has now been raised, if you want to put that, or earned in another way, by the people smugglers who have put over 151,000 illegal migrants into this country so that they can claim asylum. It costs us £8 billion a year. That's more than the amount of money that we're taking off those pensioners for heating.
Listen, Stephen, you know me, mate. I could talk to you for absolutely ever. We really appreciate you being on. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. Steven Woolfe, migration expert, former MEP. Always welcome on Talk.